December 1942. A year after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, the U.S. is in a critical position in the Pacific. Attacked from all sides, only one of the Navy's aircraft carriers remains to confront the Imperial Japanese fleet. Aboard USS Enterprise, pilots are flying older aircraft to challenge Japan's formidable Zero fighters. While it may seem like an uneven match, that's all about to change. Within several months, the U.S. government will provide its Navy with the means to emerge victorious, furnishing the planes and ships needed to defeat the best and most aggressive naval fleet of all time. Navy crews will bring the Japanese to their knees, fighting them on their own turf. Within several months, America's Naval Air Force will become the most powerful ever mustered by a nation at war. So begins the reign of the giants of the seas. On December 7th, 1941, at dawn, squadrons of Japanese aircraft take off from the decks of 6 aircraft carriers in the heart of the Pacific. These are seasoned pilots, likely the best of their time, with several campaigns behind them. The Japanese fleet is intimidating. In addition to their aircraft carriers, in the 1930s, the Empire began construction of the 2 largest battleships ever conceived, Yamato and Musashi. They're the jewels of the fleet, considered decisive weapons for naval battles to come. Now that Japan is on a quest for the raw materials that they sorely lack. Their forces set off in pursuit of vital new territory. Their expansionist politics in East Asia first manifest in Taiwan, Korea, Manchuria, Inner Mongolia, Kyungshu, Hainan, Shaanxi, Hong Kong, and Tonkin. The United States, opposed to this expansionism in the Pacific, quickly becomes enemy number 1. The goal of the raid is simple: weaken the U.S. Pacific Fleet to such an extent that it cannot interfere with the Japanese conquest of Malaya, the Dutch East Indies, and the islands of the Pacific. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto knows that total war is at stake, and even proclaims, if hostilities break out with the United States, taking Guam and the Philippines, or even Hawaii and San Francisco won't suffice. We'll have to head to Washington and sign a treaty at the White House.
The Japanese realize that it will only be a matter of time, once the war in the Pacific begins, before the United States can interfere with their progress toward the Southern Resource Zone. So they come up with a plan for a preemptive attack that will prevent the United States from interfering.
No fewer than 352 fighters, dive bombers, and torpedo bombers will attack the enemy fleet in 2 successive waves. It's the first attack of this scale in naval history. It takes the Americans completely by surprise. This attack on the Hawaiian Islands drives the United States into World War II.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, the United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. I ask that the Congress declare a state of war between the United States and the Japanese Empire.
Americans unite around one objective: avenge Pearl Harbor.
Pearl Harbor flips the switch of American sentiment. It has the effect of galvanizing American will and pulling it toward something that's almost unanimous, a moment unlike we have ever seen in our history before, where it was personal. People wanted to join the American military, and through uniformed service, they wanted to extract revenge from the Empire of Japan for what it had done. In fact, so many thousands of young Americans flocked to recruiting stations all over the country that we had volunteers that sustained us through a period of expansion lasting all the way to the end of 1942.
A great industrial power now rises up to challenge Imperial Japan. And as Admiral Yamamoto declared before the raid, "I can run wild for about 6 months. After that, I have no hope of success." At Pearl Harbor, the Japanese followed their usual strategy and hit hard. But they still missed targets of primary importance. The 3 aircraft carriers of the Pacific Fleet, Lexington, Saratoga, and Enterprise, weren't in Hawaii on the 7th of December, 1941. The Americans have 8 more aircraft carriers, 5 of them Yorktown class. But only 3 of them are stationed in the Pacific. Compared to Japan's 10, the Navy will have to go into battle with the ships it has. USS Enterprise is a heavyweight among Yorktown-class carriers. It's the most decorated U.S. ship of World War II. This giant is 246 meters long, weighs more than 20,000 tons, and can carry 80 aircraft. Its pilots soon become the heroes of a nation on the ropes, forced to destroy the enemy or perish. The Douglas SBD Dauntless dive bomber, put into service in 1940, is the first sent into combat. 10 meters long with a wingspan of 12.6 meters, it weighs 4.5 tons. It's slower and less maneuverable than the Japanese fighters, but the Dauntless can still reach a ceiling of more than 7,500 meters. Armed with 2 M2 Browning 50 caliber machine guns, 1 725-kilogram bomb, and 2 45-kilogram bombs beneath its wings, the Dauntless is rugged, effective, and dependable. The pilots nickname it slow but deadly. And yet, the crews pull off some miraculous feats. The Dauntless will sink more ships than any other aircraft involved in the War of the Pacific. On December 10th, 1941, only 3 days after Pearl Harbor, Lieutenant Clarence Dickinson takes off on a scouting mission aboard his Dauntless dive bomber. Several minutes later, he spots and sinks the Japanese submarine I-70. But it's one small victory for the Allies. During the first months of 1942, they suffer a string of defeats in the region. The Pacific War isn't looking good for them. After occupying Manchuria and part of China, Japanese troops are on Alaska's doorstep. To the southwest, they've conquered Burma, Thailand, French Indochina, the Philippines, the Dutch East Indies, Java, the region north of New Guinea, and have reached Wake Atoll, 3,600 kilometers west of the Hawaiian Islands.
Churchill and Roosevelt are wondering what they'll do to combat what seems like inexorable Japanese domination.
And 1942 begins abysmally for America's Naval Air Force. Langley, the Navy's first aircraft carrier, is sunk off the coast of Java. The Japanese had launched a squadron of Mitsubishi G4M Betty bombers at it. They were the most widely produced bombers between 1941 and 1945. With wingspans of nearly 25 meters and almost 20 meters long, the Betty is light and fast at 428 kilometers an hour. It has a powerful range of action at nearly 3,000 kilometers. But the weakness of the armor around its fuel tanks exposes it to enemy fire. The Japanese nickname it the Flying Lighter. (1942) has barely begun, and the U.S. Navy has already lost an aircraft carrier. Now, only 2 remain in the Pacific, while Japan still has 10. The Americans need a new fighter plane, one that can outperform the infamous Japanese Mitsubishi A6M Zero, designed specifically as a carrier-based fighter. With its wingspan of 12 meters, weighing 2.5 tons, and a nearly 1,000 horsepower engine, the Zero is fast, 561 kilometers an hour, maneuverable and heavily armed with 2 20mm guns and 2 7.7mm machine guns. The Grumman F4F Wildcat is easy to identify. Small and boxy, its wings are fixed in medium position and its landing gear is stowed in the fuselage. It weighs 3 tons and is armed with 6 Browning 50 caliber machine guns and can carry 91 kilos of bombs. Its Pratt & Whitney 1,200 horsepower engine can reach a maximum speed of 600 kilometers an hour. It's only slightly less maneuverable than a Zero fighter.
Zero was much faster. It could outclimb, outdive, and outturn a Wildcat. How did we use this old airplane and manage to make it work so well? The first thing I already mentioned, it was very, very rugged, very difficult to shoot down. The fuel tank had a self-sealing bladder in it, so when a bullet went through it, it sealed itself up. You didn't lose your gas. The pilot sat in an armored tub, basically, like a bathtub. He had steel plate all around him. So the plane was very survivable. The other thing you had to do if you're a Wildcat pilot, you had to do formation flying. You had to be with another Wildcat to protect each other. So if one Wildcat got jumped, he could maneuver and try to pull the Zero in front of the other Wildcat.
At the dawn of 1942, Americans are in need of hope and heroes, and the Navy pilots are ready to give them both. In April, barely 4 months after Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor, the U.S. launches a daring mission, the Doolittle Raid. 16 B-25 bombers are loaded onto the aircraft carrier Hornet. One of their goals, to retaliate for Pearl Harbor and boost American morale. But it's a gamble, because the U.S. is going up against one of the best and certainly most aggressive naval fleets in the world. The first round will be decided in the Coral Sea. To isolate Australia from its American ally, the Japanese decide in May 1942 to seize two important ports, Port Moresby in New Guinea and Tulagi in the Solomon Islands. Using 3 aircraft carriers, 2 heavy, 1 light, the Japanese fleet will confront American forces based on the carriers Lexington and Yorktown. It's the first naval aviation battle in history. The two groups are separated by a distance of 400 kilometers. A new form of warfare is playing out, a battle beyond the horizon. The ships of the two fleets will face off, sight unseen. But to have any hope of annihilating their enemy, the pilots will need the precise coordinates of their targets. The airstrikes begin on May 7, 1942. Late that morning, the combined air groups of the USS carriers Yorktown and Lexington flush out the Japanese carrier Shoho. First they bomb, and then torpedo, and it sinks. Confusion reigns. As night falls, 27 Japanese aircraft apparently lost almost try to land on the decks of the two American carriers. At dawn on May 8, 1942, patrol aircraft spot the enemy carriers, and the attacks begin again. Zuikaku escapes thanks to bad weather, while Shokaku is hit by dauntless torpedo bombers. Its flight deck is heavily damaged. Yorktown eludes 8 torpedoes, but is struck by a bomb. Then, Lexington's oil and aviation fuel lines are hit, causing a series of fiery explosions inside the vessel. Its 3,000 crew members abandon ship, which is then scuttled by escort destroyers. After 2 days of combat, the Japanese have attained only half of their initial objectives. They failed to take Port Moresby in New Guinea, but they do seize Tulagi in the Solomon Islands.
The Battle of the Coral Sea is a deadlock in the struggle between the Japanese and the Americans. And what I mean by that is that on a tactical level, the Japanese have an advantage because they sank USS Lexington, one of the American aircraft carriers. But on a higher strategic level, the Battle of the Coral Sea is the first time that a Japanese campaign has been stopped dead in its tracks.
Over the course of the battle, the Japanese lose 80 aircraft and as many experienced pilots. While the Americans strive to recover the bodies of their fallen pilots from the open seas, the Japanese do not. This mission not only neutralizes 3 of their aircraft carriers, the loss of so many Japanese pilots will also have serious repercussions for future battles. At the end of May 1942, with reinforcements from the Atlantic, the United States once again has 3 aircraft carriers in the Pacific. But Yorktown is badly damaged. The Japanese still have 10, with 2 still awaiting repair or rearmament. Given this strength, It's hard to imagine the U.S. Navy winning a decisive battle against such a strategic and experienced adversary. Struck by a 250-kilogram bomb, Yorktown is diverted to Pearl Harbor, 7,000 kilometers away. It arrives on May 27th and is repaired in only 3 days. The Japanese think they've sunk it, but Yorktown reappears on May 30th. Leaving Pearl Harbor, it heads for a small and now famous U.S. territory, Midway. By seizing these tiny islands in the middle of the Pacific, Admiral Yamamoto plans to set the stage for the ultimate battle. His objective is to destroy the enemy fleet and, above all, sink the American carriers. But he needs a decisive victory.
Yamamoto is unaware of the fact that U.S. naval intelligence has broken their codes. And having that information will reward us handsomely over and over again all the way through to the end of the conflict. In the short run, though, having broken the Japanese naval codes allows us to position our fleet ahead of the Battle of Midway in such a way as to lay the greatest ambush in naval history.
The carriers Enterprise and Hornet now have backup with the Yorktown's successful return. Yamamoto thinks he's going to surprise the enemy, but he has no idea what he's in for. The American Air Group has more than 200 aircraft on board: Dauntless dive bombers, TBD Devastator torpedo bombers, and F-4F Wildcats. They'll be supported by 100 aircraft based at Midway, among them the first torpedo bomber, TBF Avengers.
Grumman Avenger was the largest aircraft that we operated off carriers in World War II. It replaced the Douglas Devastator torpedo bomber, which was obsolete in 1941.
The Grumman Avenger was a workhorse and a success. It weighs 8 tons and is powered by a 1,900 horsepower engine to a maximum speed of 444 kilometers an hour. Its armament includes 2 wing-mounted 50 caliber machine guns, a 50 caliber machine gun mounted in the turret, and 1 rear-mounted 30 caliber machine gun. It carries 1 900-kilogram torpedo and 8 5-inch rockets. The Battle of Midway will be bloody. Waves of Japanese fighters fly over the atoll. Defensive forces can't put a stop to their relentless assaults. And the Japanese think victory may be in the bag. But Admiral Nagumo decides to rearm aircraft for a second air raid on Midway.
By mid-1942, Japanese naval aviators were the best in the world. American naval aviators were good and they were well equipped. They were just slightly less experienced than the Japanese. For the Japanese, they've been campaigning for 6 months. They're a little bit on the exhausted side. And the Battle of the Coral Sea had proven that they could be beaten. The Americans go into the Battle of Midway with an intelligence advantage, and they're going to use that advantage to get an upper hand.
Nagumo makes another fateful decision. Twice, he orders changing out the armament of the aircraft queued up on the flight deck, while others, short on fuel, are requesting permission to land. In vain, most crash into the sea. There are no backup aircraft to defend the Japanese carriers. Suddenly, squadrons of dauntless dive bombers appear, raining bombs on their enemy. Within 20 hours, the Japanese Imperial Navy loses 4 aircraft carriers: Soryu, Kaga, Akagi, and Hiryu, 1 cruiser, and 253 aircrafts. 3,057 men are missing. The Americans lose their aircraft carrier Yorktown, 1 destroyer, 98 aircrafts, and 307 aviators and sailors.
For the Japanese Navy, the Battle of Midway is a catastrophe. They've lost 4 fleet aircraft carriers, they've lost hundreds of pilots, and for them, in order to sustain protracted war against the United States, they're going to need more of all of those. So the Battle of Midway and then the events that follow it are going to put them in this position of having to rebuild all of that strength that they lost at Midway.
Yamamoto was right when he predicted that Japan would have to gain the upper hand quickly before the U.S. Navy could crush them. 6 months after the attack on Pearl Harbor, Japanese expansionism in the Pacific is faltering. Galvanized by their victory at Midway, the Americans hope to regain a foothold in the Solomon Islands lost a month earlier. They call in Atlantic-based aircraft carriers as reinforcements and launch the first major offensive against the Japanese Empire. On August 7, 1942, Allied forces, primarily American, reach the southern Solomon Islands and land on the islands of Guadalcanal, Tulagi, and Florida. The objective: to prevent the Japanese from occupying them, while using them to launch an offensive on Japan's main base at Rabaul, on the island of New Britain. On Guadalcanal, American forces seize the landing strip at Henderson Field. The Marines will defend it tooth and nail, and it will never be recaptured by the enemy despite repeat attempts. The Japanese have reached the tipping point in their takeover of the Pacific. But the Navy will pay a high price for this major strategic victory. On September 15, 1942, USS Wasp is sunk off the Solomon coastline. In October, the Hornet CV-8 sustains irreparable damages during the Battle of Santa Cruz in the Solomon Islands. It goes down with 140 sailors. In autumn 1942, the U.S. Navy loses 5 fleet aircraft carriers: USS Langley, Lexington, Yorktown, Wasp, and Hornet. Enterprise and Saratoga are the only carriers to survive these attacks. Still, the Americans hold their own. The Japanese have also lost 6 aircraft carriers since the start of the war, but deployed more than their enemy. The Americans no longer have reserves in the Atlantic. How to make up for this shortfall? By building more aircraft carriers. In October 1942, USS Essex, the first of its class, is declared operational. 24 Essex-class carriers will be built in just 2 years, like USS Hornet, second ship of its name. Hornet is a 36,000-ton giant, the length of 3 football fields. It's outfitted with 60 anti-aircraft guns, 50% more than its predecessors of the Yorktown class, and can fire between 140 to 450 rounds a minute. Hornet can surround itself with a barrage of defensive fire. This armament becomes essential in October 1944, when Japan's first kamikazes have only one mission: to sink the Navy's aircraft carriers. Equipped with 5-inch guns, Hornet can open fire on enemy ships or defend itself during landings. Its belt armor is more than 100 millimeters thick. Its deck is also heavily armored to withstand Japanese bombardment. Hornet carries 103 aircraft, fighters, fighter bombers, and torpedo launchers. It can reach record speeds of up to 33 knots and has a cruising range of 15,000 miles, half the circumference of the Earth. By June 1944, Admiral Raymond Spruance's Task Force 58 includes 6 Essex-class aircraft carriers. The Americans deploy 15 aircraft carriers with 956 aircraft. USS Enterprise and 8 smaller light carriers are also present. Some, like Belleau Wood, were built in just 6 months. These ships are game changers.
In the aftermath of the Battle of Midway, the United States realizes that the aircraft carrier is the decisive naval weapon. And because of that, we then mobilize American industry and the American economy toward the construction of those ships. We launch 100 aircraft carriers in just 3 years. It's a shipbuilding miracle. And the origins of that miracle stretch all the way back to the pre-war time period. Had we not planned in a time of peace for what would ultimately happen, we would not have been able to produce nearly as many ships as we did between 1943 and 1945. And it was those ships that brought us victory over the Japanese Imperial Navy in the end.
Facing off against Task Force 58, 9 Japanese carriers, including 4 light carriers with 430 aircraft, supported by 250 land-based aircraft, 680 aircraft, ready to swoop down on the Americans. But the Essex-class carriers have their own secret weapons on board. New models of aircraft with folding wings, like the Curtiss SB-2C Helldiver. It's a powerful fighter bomber that's faster and easier to maneuver than the Dauntless, with an enormous payload. It's nicknamed the Beast by its crews and can hold 900 kilos of ordnance and use a range of weaponry, including rockets.
During the course of the Second World War, the United States makes great progress in terms of aviation design. We go from, in 1941, aircraft that were borderline obsolescent to 1943, when we introduce an aircraft like the F-6F Hellcat. It is the true tactical wizard of air-to-air combat in World War II, and it is one of the most successful fighter aircraft of all times. The F-6F will dominate the skies over the island outposts that we will take back from the Japanese.
More efficient than the Wildcat with its speed and maneuverability, the Hellcat is a formidable aircraft. Its pilots will take out more than 5,000 enemy planes. It dominates the aerial battle space more than any other naval fighter in the Second World War. The Hellcat will be the hero of the Battle of the Philippine Sea. Between June 19th and 20th, 1944, the American fleet shoots down 426 of the 680 Japanese aircraft engaged, a full 2/3 of the Imperial Air Force. Imperial Japan loses 3 aircraft carriers, and its naval aviation will never recover. While the Americans have lost 130 aircraft, and 76 pilots are either dead or missing. They have just come off a huge victory, thanks to their courageous pilots.
These were grueling missions for these aviators. They had to cover vast distances of open ocean, then they had to fight the enemy, and then they had to return to the carrier. And after surviving all of that, they still had one last hazard awaiting them, and that was they had to put the aircraft down on the heaving, tiny deck of an aircraft carrier out in the vastness of the Pacific Ocean.
Aircraft land at more than 200 kilometers an hour, 55 meters per second. If they miss the arresting wires that would decelerate it, they risk overshooting the flight deck and crashing into the sea. Throughout World War II, Navy pilots had orders to dump all ammunition before landing, out of precaution. Exhausted by their missions, the pilots were practically landing solo. They couldn't rely on any kind of tracking or radio navigation, and in worst-case scenarios, if a plane were to crash on deck without having dumped ammo, they could all go up in flames. Over the first 3 years of the war, the American pilots gained experience and savoir-faire. They were on a winning streak, while the number of Japanese pilots was dwindling. The best were taken out, and the ones who replaced them had far less training and experience. In December 1941, the attack on Pearl Harbor had demonstrated the great offensive capabilities of aircraft carriers. 3 years later, the Americans had not only absorbed this lesson, they learned to beat the Japanese at their own game. At the end of 1943, the Navy commissioned 17 Essex-class heavy aircraft carriers, 9 Independence-class light carriers, and 74 escort carriers.
Carrier-based naval aviation had a second role in the Pacific War, and that was to provide tactical close air support for ground units who were involved in recapturing all the territory that the Japanese had seized at the outset of the war. Without naval aviators flying in support of ground operations, the ground troops would never have been able to recapture all this territory from the Japanese by the end of 1944.
At the end of October 1944, the Japanese Admiralty launches all of its forces at the Philippines, where the Americans are preparing to land. Between October 24th and 25th, in an area about a third of the size of Europe, 4 battles will pit 68 Japanese ships weighing a total of 700,000 tons against 225 American ships with a record weight of 1,316,000 tons.
The Battle of Leyte Gulf is the largest naval battle in history. Over 200,000 naval personnel participated in the battle on both sides. There were 16 American aircraft carriers committed to this battle. The Japanese commit 4, 1 fleet aircraft carrier, 3 smaller carriers. 1,800 aircraft are involved in this battle, 300 Japanese, 1,500 American. So it's not only the largest surface action in naval history, it's also the largest naval aviation battle that has ever taken place. And we will never see any more battles in human history that can rival it.
For this encounter, the Japanese have brought out their super battleships, Yamato and Musashi. They're convinced that these 2 ships will turn the tide in their favor. Their firepower is truly extraordinary. Shells weighing a ton can be sent flying distances of 40 kilometers or more.
It's fascinating to recognize that even at this late stage in the war, after Coral Sea, Midway, Santa Cruz, Battle of the Philippine Sea, the Japanese still imagine that a single decisive naval action will destroy the American Navy and prevent it from invading the Japanese home islands. And that's why for this, they bring out the big guns. The big guns are going to be there to make us bleed and to ruin our hopes of invading the home islands.
The 16 American carriers will play a pivotal role during the confrontation. Opposing them, only 4 aircraft carriers remain. The last of the Imperial Navy's fleet. The night of October 25th, 1944, these 4 ships will have sunk. What options remain? Without experienced pilots, without aircraft, the Japanese carriers served as decoys, allowing other naval forces to attack American amphibious capability during landing, but to no avail. The 116 aircraft they carried were lost. 800 others based on land were destroyed. After the bloodbath of the Mariana Islands campaign, it's the chaos of Leyte Gulf. 3 years after the attack on Pearl Harbor, it's both the end of Japanese naval aviation and long-held ideas of how to wage war at sea. Conventional ships are almost helpless against massive aerial attacks orchestrated by dozens of aircraft carriers. On the first day of the conflict, the American carriers' air groups had already claimed one of the jewels of the enemy fleet, the giant battleship Musashi. $73,000 tons of ship sunk in a matter of minutes after being struck by 17 bombs and 19 torpedoes. Out of a 2,900-member crew, 1,000 went down with the ship. Facing mounting casualties and running out of time, the Japanese are left with no alternative but to adopt suicide tactics. After capturing the Philippines, the Americans land at Iwo Jima in February 1945 and at Okinawa in April. The Navy's carriers are getting closer to Japan. During the Battle of Leyte Gulf, the Americans were faced with the first large-scale kamikaze attacks. It took only 1 aircraft to sink the light carrier St. Lo. 143 crew members died or were reported missing. The suicide attacks will increase, most often carried out by terrified young men, and not the fanatics sometimes portrayed. One of the first kamikazes, Naval Aviator Lieutenant Yukio Seki, sank the St. Lo. He reportedly stated before this final combat mission, "The future of Japan is bleak if it means killing one of its best pilots. I'm not carrying out this mission for the Emperor or the Empire. I'm doing it because I received an order." The events that followed would prove him right. Off the coast of Okinawa, it's open season on American aircraft carriers. Kamikazes will strike fear in American crews. Between October 1944 and July 1945, nearly 4,000 Japanese pilots will perish in suicide attacks, which will fail to change the outcome of the war. The last of the suicide missions is an act of desperation. The Emperor himself orders a final operation centered around its last super battleship, Yamato. Its mission is to destroy everything in its path before running aground on the island to serve as a coastal battery. The super battleship will finally face the U.S. Navy in single combat. After the destruction of its sister ship, Musashi, the anti-aircraft defenses of this giant have been reinforced. It's ready. The Japanese military high command will finally have the decisive battle that the ship was designed to fight. But on April 6, 1945, American intelligence is quickly aware of the approaching battleship and its escort fleet.
the United States Navy learned that the Japanese super battleship Yamato had sortied from the inland sea and was approaching Okinawa, it suddenly set in motion a fascinating chain of events, because it quickly revealed that within the ranks of the United States Navy, there were still advocates of the two types of Navy. The old Navy, where they imagined the only way of dealing with this threat was by countering it with other battleships. And then advocates of the new Navy that imagined this threat can be dealt with using only naval aviation. And in the end, what happens is that the new Navy, the new vision, the naval air power advocates, they win, because this new Navy, they get to Yamato first, and they clean it up and left nothing for the old surface power advocates to deal with. So the airplanes did what the battleships didn't ever get even a chance to do.
Among these aircraft, the one that will quickly become legendary is the Corsair, the latest of the carrier-based aircraft. Fast at over 700 kilometers an hour and sturdy, the Corsair is one of the best fighter planes of World War II. Nicknamed Whistling Death by the Japanese, it featured formidable 20mm guns and heavy armament of rockets or bombs. Without air coverage, Yamato is vulnerable. 440 American aircraft, dive bombers, and torpedo bombers will attack in successive waves. At 12:45 p.m. on April 7, 1945, a first attack of 132 aircraft, SB-2C Helldivers and Grumman Avengers, seriously undermines the effectiveness of its anti-aircraft guns and hits a boiler room. Before 1 p.m., a second wave of 100 aircraft causes further flooding. The ship lists to port. A half hour later, 4 bombs wipe out the gunners of the ship's primary anti-aircraft section, and 4 or 5 torpedoes hit the servo motor compartment of the ship's main steering position. The evacuation order is given at 2:02 p.m. Yamato begins to capsize. At this moment, a fourth wave of American torpedo bombers delivers the death blow. Of the 2,774-man crew, only 276 will survive. The American Navy will suffer losses of 10 aircraft and 12 aviators over the course of the clash. American naval aviation has put an end to the Imperial Japanese Navy.
The loss of Yamato in April 1945 marks the end of an era. And that era was the period during about 40 years of human conflict when the battleship was the most powerful weapon that any nation had. By April 1945, it was proven conclusively that the battleship was no longer the most powerful weapon the aircraft carrier was.
September 2nd, 1945. 4 years after the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, Japan accepts its total defeat. The act of surrender may have been signed aboard the battleship Missouri, but it's the aircraft carriers and their crews that allowed America to win the Pacific War. Did the Japanese ever have a chance of winning the final battle? None at all. In mid-1945, the Americans launched the latest of their aircraft carrier classes, the Midway, after their first American victory in the Pacific. This behemoth, designed after 5 years on the drawing board, was built in only 17 months. After 4 years of naval and naval aviation research and development, Midway is commissioned on September 10th, 1945, 8 days after Japan's surrender. It will remain operational until 1992, having made the transition to new jet-powered flight and all the technologies associated with it. From then on, the Navy's aircraft carriers and their military aircraft will dominate every ocean on Earth, making the United States the greatest naval power of the late 20th century.